The senior executives that I've interacted with,
Yeah.
Most of them thinks AI is ChatGPT, and their understanding is that that is just the AI.
Yeah.
But to go beyond that, I think it's still we have something else to do for them to start understanding.
If you look at how people use ChatGPT, people tell it the most private things,
Oh yeah,
like
yeah.
they ask the most deep private questions, right? So what it has proven is that people trust their AIs.
I think people are talking about AI, knowing that if they don't talk about AI, then they are considered to be, somebody who is not a tech guy.
Today on the F Squared podcast, I sit down with Kamal Budhabhatti, the CEO of Little and one of Africa's most prolific tech entrepreneurs. Over 6 months ago, we explored the early signals of AI's impact. But in AI years, that might as well be a decade. In this episode, we zoom in on what's changed, how Kamal is experimenting with AI at both Little and Craft Silicon, and what banks, fintechs, and startups should really know about AI today. From core infrastructure to customer experience, this is a grounded, local take on one of the biggest technological shifts of our time. So Kamal, welcome.
Thank you.
We did our article, like it was around 6 months ago.
Yeah.
And it was quite popular. I got so much inbound. I shared some with you, of course, but a lot I didn't share. And the whole thing was, I think it was refreshing to see a number of things. One, a lot of people found it refreshing to see that Little Cab actually has almost 5 million users, and it's a super app, and it's a homegrown super app. So a lot of people meet you and speak about business and your story, and they think that story has been told. But I really value your insights around technology and where everything is going. So welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
So again, it was 6 months ago, and we talked about AI, and in AI, 6 months is a lifetime. Things are moving so fast.
That's true.
You had explained some of the decisions you're making at the time. But one thing I've found interesting in my conversations with a lot of banks and bankers is, when you speak about AI, the first thing that bankers tell you is that we've been using AI for a long time. But when you drill deeper, it's like machine learning. Whereas when we spoke, you mentioned that you are doing credit models, you've built a lot of data using machine learning. But then now when you use this LLM kind of framework, the results were just extremely different. Could you just walk us through specifically what that meant, like what was happening, and what was the shift in the results from your machine learning models to your LLM?
So what we felt is when you do a machine learning and do on a certain set of data, you are actually entering with certain biases, because you have the way you have designed a machine learning model is you are the one who are designing. So obviously when you are designing as a company, as an individual, you are already starting with a biased approach because you have a perception in the mind that this is what you think.
Exactly.
With large language model, I think that's not the case because first of all, the base model, you are not touching the base model. So you already have a base model, which to certain extent is considered to be not biased, especially to your business. It's a general model. So when you start anything with a general model, there is nothing biased that comes in. And so the results we feel, I think, are more interesting, are more factual.
Yeah.
Than a biased decision that you might and on a machine learning internally we also find it many times us as programmers, we know that this is what it should be. So when you start getting the results, you keep pushing these results to be biased towards your internal perceptions. Yeah, so we felt, and I think large language models, because of the models available, it is easier to deal with now than having your own data and use a machine learning algorithm to train from nowhere.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think this was the experience. So Stripe, massive payments company globally, they built a generational model for the entire business, and they found that there was this this card fraud, it's called carding fraud, but their ability, when they moved it to now their LLMs, the ability to detect fraud moved from like 50 something percent to 90 something percent. It was a large shift. And I guess maybe the underlying thing there is that they, as payments people, they thought that, this is how this fraud should be detected,
Yeah.
and this is what you should check for. Whereas when they moved now to the general model, it starts looking for patterns that most people would ignore.
That's true.
Like they're so counterintuitive. Did you find a specific data point, for instance, when you're doing credit models, that we were missing this thing entirely?
So, our set, as much as we believe that we have a lot of data, we believe that we are one of the large enterprise having so much data.
Yeah.
But when you compare the amount of data that we have with some of the global companies like Stripe and the others, we are extremely small in terms of the data. So the variances obviously are not as massive as what you just said. But yeah, we still felt that one, the ease, and the other one is getting unbiased information. I think we felt large language models worked out pretty well for us. And now with the models providing an intent option. So an intent option is, you create an intent where when a customer is doing this, then you have an intent to do something. I think those are called MCP. So there's an MCP server interface that has come in.
That's model context protocol.
That's true.
Yeah.
And that is making the life even more easier. Before the large language models, what we used to do is we used to ask the large language model a question on what the customer is trying to do, and based on that we used to predict something. But now with this MCP protocol, the things have become relatively much easier.
And so does that mean so the AI detects the intent, right?
Yeah.
And then the MCP executes the intent. And now
MCP gives you a traditional interface to your API for execution of that intent.
Yeah. And so now you have, I guess now you have like the tooling to now really build out some very interesting stuff. So what are some of the things you're working on at both Little Craft, especially that you're seeing that this is interesting, we should experiment on this?
So I think the intent opens up a lot of opportunities for us and anybody else, is because there are two aspects to that. One is you consume the information. So you pose a question to NLM and you get the response, you consume it, then you make a decision or an intent somewhere else outside the LLM.
Yeah.
Now,
and before you go further, I'm sorry to, can you just give us like a practical example of a consumer use case, how the intent is determined, just end to end?
So for example, a customer says, I can you please give me a list of all the customers who have transacted more than what they normally do for the past 30 days. It's an question that you would pose to an LLM. LLM is supposed to understand that question, the time frame, and what the customer is trying to do, and then now go to the traditional database, pick up that information, wrap it correctly, and reply it back into the normal interface that the LLM has it. So that integration over there was a challenge, because pick up the right intent, and then so there were a lot of guesses that used to happen. The customer says 3 months, he says large, so you pick up those keywords, try to construct an SQL command or an API command to go to the interface and get that information. So it's not always used to be correct. But with now the interface that are more generic, like MCP, it is becoming easier. It is still not perfect. Sometimes also still it gives you some garbage, but at least it's the way forward. And I believe in coming times it's going to be pretty strong.
And so just now continue on the experiments that you're doing.
So this kind, I personally believe, and I think, I don't know if you'll agree with me, is the voice is going to be the ultimate interface dealing with the technology. You know, you had initially you had commands to type. Now then the buttons came in, but then with the amount of information is out there, you know, voice I believe is going to be the ultimate user interface. And if that's the case, why can't we start piloting with the apps that we have currently? So on mobile banking, the several customers that we provide mobile banking, internet banking, the co-banking product, even the little, you know, can I just go to little and says, you know, please get me a ride to industrial area. That's all. That guy will differ out where I am, which car I take, and which is the payment option. It does everything, and just I see the cab next to me. That's
And some of these are already live, or
we are piloting. You know, we are piloting both on little and also on the mobile banking apps. So on mobile banking apps, would be a customer would just say, you know, can you please send me some airtime, or little they would say, today I'm interested in eating a pizza, and then the interface just opens up with, you know, all that. So it's we are trying our best. The thing is that when we get stuck, you know, the relative ecosystem around here with the entrepreneurs and the tech is helping each other, it's still not there. So when you get stuck in something, you then just have to start scratching your head to get the right help.
The talent base is not as robust. And this is a AI talent base.
That's
not
true.
necessarily like your traditional programming talent base.
AI talent base.
And that's a problem globally. And potentially, you know, do you use AI to kind of help you solve?
So I mean, then you end up going into ChatGPTs and Gemini and other one to try to figure out. But I still feel that, you know, when you have human to human help, you know, it becomes much nicer. It becomes more nicer.
So it's still very much experimentation mode. Nothing is like live yet. But you know, you're seeing some interesting signs. There was two questions. First, I wanted to ask about like how do you kind of now manage your internal projects from a priority perspective? Like you must have developed some intuition around it, like, you know, or do you just try everything? And secondly, it's around voice. I think, you know, personally, I like to text, right? It's just I like chatting. But I do understand, like, especially in Africa, a lot of the world, even WhatsApp is used primarily through voice mode, you know, because of, you know, ability to read, ability to write, and all this. Is that what's driving your conviction around voice?
So voice, there are two advantages to voice. One is obviously, you know, as a user, you don't need to really learn the interface. You know, today if you go to mobile banking and you need to send money to somebody or buy an airtime, you need to press a specific button, and for you to know which button to press, you need some level of intelligence to understand the user interface. Language, obviously, you know, the mobile interface could be in English, but I am not too good in English, for example, then I might have some challenges. But the voice that's how humans have always communicated, you know, from day one. From the civilization. So that interface is becoming extremely simple. And I believe a lot of people still like chatting. But I think it's just matter of time. You know, people would swing to voice overnight. Trust me. That's what my feeling is.
I think when you say it from the perspective of like how the technology is built, and you talk about like you have to go through buttons, you know, it does make sense. Like just a simple interface, there doesn't even need to be anything on the screen, right? Even if you look at how ChatGPT voice mode, it's just a circle on the screen. But that actually even brings a deeper question around like how the entire software is built. And you know, one thing Satya Nadella said is that you're actually going to have an interaction layer and then agents, like AI agents, and then multiple databases, because the traditional system of, you know, kind of the logic and the workflow doesn't make sense in an AI era. You know, would you generally agree with that? And is that how you're thinking of building? And what bottlenecks are you seeing with that?
So what is happening behind the scene is when you talk to an AI or any device, the only thing that the AI is overdoing there is understanding the intent of the customer and passing it on.
Yeah,
Now, once it is passed on to another layer, that is now be a traditional layer. You know, what the customer is trying to do. If you know what the customer is trying to do, and then now execute the traditional commands to pick up because the database is, there is a lot of API layers which are out there, databases which are out there. They all sit in a traditional databases. They all sit on the traditional layer where you have an API to do a certain things. Now, it's not going to change overnight. So these APIs would still remain, but once the intent is clear, the agents, and that's what they call it, agentic AIs, is these agents are going to understand the interface on one side, the intent on the other side, and then now somebody, a programmer like us and the others, will pick up that intent and give it to the traditional system to execute it.
So it's still some time before now you kind of find this deeply intuitive AI applications, and because you mentioned there's a talent gap. You mentioned you initially mentioned that there's a kind of like the AI is not yet there to fully understand. It still messes around sometimes, but it's improving. And I was reading something where like reinforcement learning is actually driving deeper context and understanding. So it seems like it's a matter of time before you have these truly AI apps, because that's a paradigm change completely.
That's true. So that's the knowledge gap obviously is there. But very surprising, there is also an usage gap. I was looking at one of the graphics a couple of days back. It says China in the workforce, they have started using AI generally up to 37%, which is the highest, followed by US, which is about 35, and then some European countries. And Africa is nowhere in that map. That's for the usage of AI. So if the usage of AI is also so little, you come up with a very fancy, AI smart app. To roll out is also going to be a challenge, because the adoption is going to take some time.
No, I think we'll come to that point later. I've got some interesting perspectives on that. But you've built your career, of course, with Craft Silicon, and you almost touch every bank in East Africa in some way, and so you're very close to these guys. You're an advisor to many. And so one of the things that I'm sure you're having a lot of C-suite discussions, CEO board discussions with bankers around AI. Like, what are the kind of common questions you're getting? Like, this is what we are thinking, or even that conversation may not be happening at all.
So, so what is happening, and I don't know it's true or not true, but I think people are talking about AI, knowing that if they don't talk about AI, then they are considered to be, somebody who is not a tech guy. So if a CEO doesn't talk about AI, then they feel that particular CEO. So CEOs, even without knowing, I think many of the people are just continue repeating AI in their conversation. And the reason for that, I believe, is that people want to do something because they've seen the hype all around, but not able to pinpoint, identify where they are going to start it. So there's a lot of confusion, especially in the CXO levels. They know that, yes, they want to do it, but what exactly and how it's going to affect both their bottom line and their growth, I think it's still not very clear. So people still continue, fishing around in all the directions to come up with something.
It's interesting you say that. I think we were here with Eric from Loop. And the point he made was that the way he sees it is that his leaders first need to fully understand AI. Because once you understand AI and the capabilities, you have the context of the business. And therefore you can say, actually, this is the biggest leverage area for AI in this specific business. Naturally, everyone thinks, credit decisioning. It may not be, credit. It may or may not be, right? So I think what you're saying kind of is mirroring what Eric is saying, is that there needs to be like you need to have an understanding of the AI at least first.
most of the senior executives that I've interacted with,
Yeah.
Most of them thinks AI is ChatGPT, and their understanding is that that is just the AI. But to go beyond that, I think it's still we have something else to do for them to start understanding.
Yeah, and I think my next question was from a priority perspective, like what's the first thing to do? But I think it's obvious that it's more of like an education and training thing. Personally at Frontier FinTech, we are big users of AI. Like, the way we think about everything is like, how can you design a process with AI in mind? Whether it's research or setting up the podcast and mapping out who are the guests, even sales, like find prospects for the business and map them based on this kind of characteristics, and then you feed back your data from the prospects that have worked and those ones that haven't worked, and said find more of the ones who have worked. And so you have to kind of just think AI first.
So, but you see, what's happening is, all this data that you collect, ultimately you put it into the same interface. Most of you, I don't know about you guys,
Yeah.
but all the people that I've done, they would have a good Excel sheet over there. They pick up the data, paste it on ChatGPT. Whatever ChatGPT gives out, pick it up from there, takes it back to the Excel for certain things. So, I think that currently all the executives, what they are saying is their knowledge about AI starts and ends at a standard LLM like ChatGPT. Yeah, which it's changing, but I think it needs to be changed at more speed than what's happening at the moment.
Yeah.
And education is in there because they just need to be well educated.
Yeah. And it's the kind of same journey you had 10 years ago with APIs. And the CEO needs to understand what an API is from like a business perspective, and therefore what do partnerships mean, because partnerships are executed through APIs, right? And if there was no context, then a number of banks kind of missed that.
Yeah.
They missed that growth. And if you look at the market right now, both in Kenya and globally, you can clearly see, like, 15 years later, the delta between the banks that did what they needed to do and those kind of who just were laggards. Like now the evidence is becoming clear. And so this is an important point. But now, assuming that I know what AI is, I understand it properly, understand it more than it's just ChatGPT, understand it as, a broader platform shift in technology. You know, how should I think about my infrastructure, especially backend, database, cloud, all that kind of stuff, and especially in the context of the technical debt that you know so much about as Kamal. Like, how should I think about, now that I know what I know, what steps should I take to start improving my infrastructure, to start now getting the full results from AI, at least at a very early stage?
I think the infrastructure I don't think is going to be a challenge because cloud is becoming very pervasive. Though some countries, especially in Africa, have some legal challenges in terms of pushing data to the cloud. And building an infrastructure in-house that would support your language models or any kind of AI models on premise, I think is going to be not for everyone. Not for everyone. So a bigger customer, with a larger budgets can do that on premise. But the smaller ones will still have to be relying on cloud. Which is quite okay. So you might also see some regulatory framework changes coming into the market that would allow customers to host data outside their geographical boundaries.
Yeah. And do you feel like the big cloud players will find a need to, because demand for AI now is high, and revenues from AI can be higher, so it makes more sense to build cloud centers in areas where previously we may not have found the need to?
Okay, I'm not too sure about that, because still Africa is a very small market.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
if you look at it,
Yeah.
we keep feeling that we are so many. We keep feeling that we have so many countries. We keep
Yeah.
feeling that we have so many banks and a lot of need for it. But
Yeah.
when we compare what we do and the other guys, I think we are still a very small player.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, you
Yeah.
know, maybe with all the countries in Africa, will a cloud provider get into all that? I highly doubt. So there'll be some strategic locations in Africa which could be as the AI center for the continent.
Yeah.
And then people would now be using that infrastructure.
Got it. And you know, so having said that, like, what's the minimum viable kind of, you know, infrastructure you need? So you need your basic cloud capabilities. You need to have your business running on cloud. Outside of that, what else? Like,
You don't necessarily need to have your business on the cloud,
Yeah.
you know, because your operational business is maybe is on premise.
Yeah.
You know, the operational whatever you are doing on day-to-day basis can continue doing that.
Yeah.
But then there is some interface or some link between that and a cloud provider which can consume a part of that data and then give out some results.
Got it.
So I think there'll always be, you know, a combination of both and hybrid models.
Yeah. And you know, one of the points you raised earlier was around the LLMs being trained on so much data. Of course, you know, whether it's Llama, OpenAI, Anthropic, there's tons of data that they've trained on. In fact, the issue now is that they're saying that they're actually running out of data to train, right? But at the same time, banks say that we've got all this historical data that dates back into, you know, thousands of, I mean, hundreds of years of decades. But you know, one thing I keep asking myself is that if you look at the amount of data that's been used to train the AIs versus what a marginal bank is introducing into, you know, the data pool, you know, it's arguably very small, right? Now, do you think that, and you know, so on one hand, if you understand how AI is built, then what you're introducing may not be, you know, such a game changer, right? So do you think that banks have, like, you know, that specific unique data advantage, or is it just something that people tell themselves?
So banks, you know, holding banks are also not holding a lot of data. You know, in Kenya, the regulatory requirement is 7 years. So today, if I walk into a bank and says, "Give me the account statement before 10 years," they would start scratching their head.
Yeah.
So a lot of this data, either it is not there or is just sitting in some corner in some weird formats. And the reason they keep it for 7 years is because there is a regulatory requirement. If the requirement was for 5 years, they would be keeping for the 5 years. But now that data is becoming a key component of anything that you want to do on AI, I think banks have started figuring it out that they want to retain the data. I mean, even in little 4 years before, 3-4 years before, the old data, you know, we just never used to, you know, keep an eye on it, you know, because storing a data was expensive for us. So any data which we felt, you know, was not so critical, we used to, you know, shred it off.
Yeah.
But now we are not doing that because we believe that fine, today I don't have an use for it, or a use case is not there to use that data, but someday it will come. So now everything that is happening, we are storing it.
Yeah.
And that same approach banks and financial institutions are going to take at some point, where any data that they would have which is required or not required, they would still continue storing that. And that obviously would increase the cost.
Yeah.
You need to have an infrastructure to keep retaining that data. And that's where maybe some of this data, they'll just ship it to the cloud and leave it there, or increase their internal infrastructure to keep storing it, for the fact that they might need it at some point.
But the bigger question is, assuming I have this data, and you have, on one hand, a new company, a new digital bank, for instance, that's running on data trained using Meta or any of those platforms, and I have a bank that's been around for, let's say, 7 years and has all that data, would there be a significant shift or change because this one has additional data that this one doesn't have? Or, would they be kind of on the same playing field?
I think the bank who has the data, if they use it correctly, it would have an advantage than the new bank that just popped in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So data, it makes a difference. When you spoke last time, you mentioned that one of your big fears was that a lot of African companies will just be AI resellers, right? And the understanding, at least the context of the time, was that the values accruing to these large models, these foundational models. But in the last few months, you've seen some of these AI wrappers, as they are called, really grow in terms of revenue. Of course, there is churn in terms of customer tries 1 month, but it seems like people are building legitimate businesses. Now, you know, in fact, I read somewhere that calling an AI company an AI wrapper is like calling a former company an AWS wrapper, or like Stripe calling Stripe an AWS wrapper, because they're just using foundational cloud capabilities. Do you still retain that view that we'll just become AI resellers, or do you feel that you can actually build something meaningful?
So it's like the rails. The foundational models that came out from the West. Well trained models. They've invested all that billions to make these models. There is no point in redoing that locally here. So obviously you will have to use some of those ones and wrap your product around that.
Yeah.
So that would still continue happening, but I think there's nothing wrong. It's just like an operating system. You have an operating system, and then you are building your product sitting on that operating system. You have a database from Oracle, from SQL, and then you are building your products on top of the SQL. You are not designing the SQL product of your own, Oracle of your own. So that would still continue. I think you'll get the base models might still continue coming from wherever it's coming at the moment, and then the entrepreneurs like us and the others will build on top of it.
Yeah.
And come up with the products that would add value to them. But what I meant saying that last time was that when you do that, a certain amount of revenue will still end up going there.
Yeah.
Today on little, because we use cloud, we use Google for maps and everything, close to about 37% of our revenue just goes to them. But these are operational costs. Yeah.
And it brings philosophical questions, because there's also the issue of like ad revenue in Kenya, and how a lot of small businesses are now sending billions of shillings every year to Meta, to Google, for their business. Maybe 2 decades ago, that money was going into nation media for classifieds and everything. And it's like, as this globalization is happening, some of these global utilities are now just taking the revenue, right? But the question is, what can you do? Like, it's just the reality of the world. It is what it is.
Yeah, that is what it is.
Yeah.
And at least for Africa, I think that at least in the countries that where you operate in, we feel that might still continue for a while.
Yeah.
But some of these things have started changing in several other economies. For example, you walk into India, India has its own unicorns of that nature where people are using them. For example, the mapping. There are a lot of companies who use Google, but there are also a lot of companies who use locally developed mapping apps from India, because it's a larger market. So that might come into Africa, but not in the near future, I believe.
Yeah. And so the call is to, it's to go deeper into the technology stack for time. But that requires deliberate focus. It requires significant talent. And, you need to be serious. Like India takes this thing seriously, China takes their technology sector seriously. Just interestingly, just similarly to when I was speaking to Eric from Loop, one thing he mentioned was that fintech exports. If you look at fintech exports in Kenya, so companies providing fintech services and selling them to other markets, the revenues from that was just the same as the tea exports, at least from a study he saw. And so the next logical thing was that the same kind of policy focus that tea gets, in terms of like the government sets up infrastructure to support the entire tea industry. I think the same needs to be done for tech, so that now you can get the budgets to now invest in the talent that will enable you to build your own local maps.
Yeah, so I to give you a feedback or comment to that is the people who are making the policy decisions, are they well informed? Are they well educated in terms of what are these decisions that needs to be taken? And if that happens, then yeah, because today, yeah, as much as we had this policy document that came in how Kenya is going to treat the AI, but beyond that, I just, beyond that, there is nothing that's happening. You don't have special incentives for local companies. You don't have any sort of focus in where Kenya needs to be or needs to be taken. That we believe that a lot has to be done.
Now, speaking of talent, like ever since the AI explosion over the last 3 years, are there any different measures you've taken towards building your talent pool at Little, or is it just same business as usual? You've always been focused on getting the right people across the door. Nothing has changed, or like everything has changed. I'm looking at my entire thing differently.
No, it's the same. It's the same. I know the team that we have, we are just trying to sharpen their skills with whatever best we can. But nothing drastic has changed. Just what has changed and what I think will continue changing is the excitement. If somebody is given a project that is around the AI, I think they are more excited to do than the traditional projects that they are doing. So that excitement is there, but the knowledge gap still continues.
And I think there's a major AI CEO who said that he expects 50% of entry level jobs to go out the window in a few years. Do you share that view, or how do you see that mapping out? At least because you're recruiting people, you understand AI more than most people do. How do you see that playing out? Not necessarily within your companies, but at least in the Kenyan context.
So the basic jobs that I think are getting mentioned are normal data entry jobs, normal jobs that the agents can do it. I agree with that. There would be a massive layoffs happening in some of these places. The speed of work is also getting faster. So today, the agents or the AI is able to do a lot of your work. So before I was able to deliver something in 10 days, now maybe I can do it in 4 days. So those are ones happening. But the people who would be then dropped off because of the AI taking over some of the things, they would get into something which is different. So it will happen. I agree with that. I agree.
Now I want to speak about consumer financial services. Little is providing financial services. Everyone, you built mobile banking apps. You have your view on how voice is going to be the key driver of a lot of this adoption. And you've also mentioned that you've also mentioned that the adoption is low, right? What ChatGPT did really well was that they put a chat wrapper around an LLM that made it usable. That was like their core innovation, right? And as you mentioned, they did it so well that people think that AI is ChatGPT. But what they did is that they just drove massive consumer adoption.
Yeah.
Now, the way I look at that is that to a level, someone has a chance to do that to financial services, in the sense that you introduce something so unique that it changes people's perceptions around how money works, how financial services are working. So someone has a chance to introduce a ChatGPT model now. And why that analogy is so apt is because Google was caught flat-footed. They've recently caught up, and Gemini is really good. I use it a lot nowadays. But these guys have already taken so much market share, if you can think about it, at least mind share from a GPT perspective. Do you think that someone can do that with like a fintech? Like someone just comes and says, "This is a fintech, right off the bat. It's a voice thing. It enables you move money. It's AI native from the start." Or do you think it's a more gradual, like you build trust step by step? And the reason I ask that is that if you ask an incumbent financial institutions, of course, psychologically, they have an incentive to say that it's going to be gradual, right? Because it suits them. But someone might just say, "I don't care. I'm just going to launch something from the beginning." How do you think that's going to work?
No, that's an interesting way to look at it. I think there could be a fintech that can launch a financial services directly, with this fancier interface. The good thing, the advantage that ChatGPT had is language is a language.
Yeah.
Okay, and you go from east to west or top to bottom. I think language is still English is still an English. Maybe dialects are different, something else is different, but English is an English. But if you on a financial services, that is not the case. Every region, every financial institutions, the services are not that generic. So having one model just wrap around like what ChatGPT did on large language models for financial services, I am not too sure if such a thing could happen. I would love to be wrong, because if such a thing happen, then it opens up several other opportunities.
So why wouldn't it happen? Assuming like you're just in Kenya, it's just a Kenyan app, right? How you move money between accounts, the infrastructure exists, Crash Silicon exists, M-Pesa exists, all those kind of things exist. How you store value, even BaaS products are now, if you look at Trust Bank, DTB, a lot of people have offered BaaS products. And you mentioned before that you have this kind of interface layer. You can build some kind of agentic system that now gives instructions. So like, if you just say, "I'm just focusing on Kenya," is there any specific barrier that would stop you from doing that? Like something I'm missing, something the market could be missing, that it will fail specifically here?
No, it will not fail. But so see, ChatGPT was language model always existed, but it became popular because of the chat interface that ChatGPT gave. A language is a language, but I'm not going to say this is Kenyan English and this is Ugandan English. So once a language model is developed, it's language model. But here in Kenya, if I have to do something, and yes, we can put some effort. If I get to DTB, I have to do something. If I go to Equity, I have to do something. If I go to Kingdom Bank, Standard Chartered, NCBA, everyone have their own different things to do. And I think the banks have also failed to collaborate conducively with each other. So when something like this comes in, just as an example, a couple of years back, we launched this product called Spot It. Spot It was an industry-wide buy now, pay later product. And we thought this is so amazing. You just go to each and every bank and start plugging them in. With all the networkings I have with all the banks from top to bottom, I was like bleeding to get the banks agree to get me connected. So that conduciveness, I think, is lacking in the financial industry. And that's not just in Kenya. I mean, you go to Uganda, Tanzania, even in India, when you go there, I think unless there's a regulator push to do something, it is still a bit difficult. But I would love to have something like that. It's an amazing way of thinking to have a fintech wrapper around all the financial services and make it extremely easy for end consumer.
Yeah. It seems what you're saying is that the idea can technically work, but the execution is going to be so difficult, especially now getting the integrations you need. So you kind of need some kind of open banking mandate, where APIs are surfaced in a standardized manner. And you also need some kind of like centralized payments layer that now enables you to easily manage, at least in a standard way that is repeatable, manage payments across across different whatevers. But now the second question is that if that is true, one thing I've always grappled with is that you mentioned intent, right? At least the way I use my financials, if you not understand how the financial system works, like how banks work, banks are incentivized to sell their products, right? So if I'm working with Bank A and they have an insurance product, they're incentivized to sell that product. It's very difficult for them to say that the way I think the best product is actually this one, knowing what I know about you. So if you look across insurance, mortgages, credit cards, all that kind of stuff. But if this AI is meant to work for you and it knows you and everything, then it shouldn't care, the relationships between the providers. If I'm offering you a service, it should kind of abstract everyone else and just present, open this account. Whether this account is Bank A or Bank B, we just think that this is the best account for you. When it comes to insurance, and just kind of like orchestrates everything from a consumer layer, and then everything in the background is just like pipelines or infrastructure. Do you see such a world happening, or do you think people will interact with their bank's AI as opposed to like a kind of like financial AI that just works for you?
People would love to interact with the financial AI, but the challenge that the financial AI provider would face is that will they be able to pick up the data from all their other banking banks that they have. So that's where I keep saying, remember I said the banks working with each other is, I think, is still a bit of a challenge. And if that doesn't happen, then bank keep pushing their products to them. Bank would keep pushing their AI to their customers. So today, we saw all these banks. And about 4 or 5 years back, I had called all the banks in one room, the ones that we were dealing with, and says, I want to launch, the same customer is an account in NCBA, the same customer is account in Kingdom, and then that customer might even have account in Standard Chartered. Why should I have 3 different apps to do that? Can I come up with one app which is obviously authenticated pretty well, so frauds don't happen, but on that one app I am able to see my whole my position across my different banks. And people loved that product.
The guys in the room loved the product.
Yeah.
Okay.
From the concept.
Yeah.
But then when they went back into their silos, it never picked up. Yeah.
And this is like your compliance guy brings issues, your legal guy brings issues.
Yeah. And then I am losing my brand identity. I'm in all sorts of things started coming in. But if you look at it if you start looking as a customer from the customer perspective, this is such a bright product. Why today Kenyans have accounts in multiple banks? Do I need 3 different apps to do all that? Today I'm here, then I log out and log in there, and log out and log in there. Yeah.
And I think that's why I recently wrote about open banking, and the core argument was that ultimately it's going to become a regulated thing. That if there's value there's utility in a customer having data from all these places. And so if you look at open finance in Brazil, it's doing really well. People are able to offer, because now for them, what they've done is that you can pull data from not only banks, but also insurance, wealth management, and build a more comprehensive product. I think that's what they're trying to do with open banking in Nigeria. And so, it's like if you're thinking about the consumer, that's the best thing to do. And I think that's one of the use cases I see, that the thing, if you look at how people use ChatGPT, people tell it the most private things,
Oh yeah, yeah,
like
yeah.
they ask the most deep private questions, right? So what it has proven is that people trust their AIs, right? And if you can build the same trust, and so if you're to think about ChatGPT's NPS, right? If you include trust, it's like way off the roof.
Yeah, oh yeah,
And
yeah,
so
yeah.
I just see such an opportunity, because if you combine such deep trust with like financial services, then you're changing the relationship game. You're changing the way people relate, so it's no longer a relationship manager, it's just now my AI. And if you now shift the game there, then the guy who builds the best AI, you know.
I think maybe we might have a two-layered approach to that. One is get the financial institutions to able to share the information. So the first stage would be a central place where a consumer comes in for all his financial services and financial information. And once that starts happening in, then now the next stage would be now to bring in the AI inside that.
Yeah.
But it's exciting. We feel that would happen. When is the question?
Yeah, it's gonna take time. I mean, if you think that already there's an education gap, then even before guys now get to the point.
I mean, one of the large banks on a product, when we said, okay, can we have one app that does that, or can we on your banking app? Can I say? He said, okay, on my mobile banking app show the other bank's account, but on other mobile banking apps don't show my accounts.
That's the normal thing you'd expect. There's one thing I remember when in my previous life I was dealing a lot with banks and their customers. And so when you speak to the customer, they'd say, I really don't like this bank. They're making my life very difficult. But then when you speak to the bank, they'd say, our customers love us. They have a great relationship with us. And so there's kind of like a gap there. And the only way you can maintain it is to create all these barriers so that you can stop people moving easily.
There's a fear, obviously, there is a fear among people that what would happen once we open up. Does that mean forget about everything? Even M-Pesa today, if you look at it, they are not that open. They allow everything coming inside, but going outside is a massive challenge. So they claim to be an open system, but if you ask us, they still have a lot of work to do.
One argument they'd make, if it was a bank CEO, if it was a leader at M-Pesa, I'd say, listen, we've invested tons of money, we've built great products, and we reserve the right to be exclusive owners of this data, right? And to an extent, that seems logical enough. What would you say to that?
So I'm not saying they are right or not.
Yeah.
All I'm saying is that if you put the customer in the center, is this the good thing about a customer? Customer doesn't care. I am your customer and it's my data. I should be allowed to be exposed to wherever I want to get it exposed.
Exactly. So give the customer the right.
Yeah. So if you...
No, great. Now I have some quick fire questions, right? The first one is that, what's the biggest, and I think you almost kind of answered it, what's the biggest AI myth you hear in bank boardrooms?
The biggest... it keeps changing, from time to time. I think, but the myth, I think people, that AI is going to be the best financial advisor, and the real financial advisors are going to be extinct. Maybe that is there. I don't know.
So you don't believe that human financial advisors will be replaced?
They would. I think. Look, a lot of work will be done by that, but still, that human intelligence has to be there.
That context.
Then,
so
the current financial advice will be keep on stepping up. Normal day to day can be done, but I think at some point humans will have to be still Yeah.
So is it a situation where you're going to see, because the problem with the current setup is that you can only scale human advice so much. So you create a situation where if you earn below specific income, you really can't get the kind of financial advice you need, right? So like AI can kind of democratize that. What global banks are doing is that they're doing a hybrid, like
Yes.
AI powered, human advisors. And so maybe what you can have is that whereas before, one advisor can only manage 20 clients, now they can manage 100. That could
So
be the
hybrid
thing.
would be there. So not every interaction will be there with a manual. AI will take up all that.
Yeah.
But there would be also some cases where humans would come in.
Yeah.
And do that.
No, that's true. I think that's I saw somewhere where this guy was saying that the way AI is currently set up, it's you have your AI, you have your AI, you have your AI. But he's working with his team and he's finding what is like extremely valuable is that if he sees his team members' AIs and their interactions. Because, let's say you're conducting a research project, I want to see what questions you're asking your AI and tell you now the way you should frame this question is like this. And so knowledge is shared, even in a wider context.
No, humans are intelligent species. So even as the AIs get smarter and smarter, I think humans will also start getting a bit smarter.
Yeah. I always say that AI will make smart people smarter.
Yeah, exactly.
Unfortunately, it'll do the opposite for the rest. Now, what's the single metric that you look at that kind of gives you confidence on an AI project, like within Little?
Ease of interaction, ease of getting what you want. I think that's the single metric that we are currently looking at.
Yeah.
How can something that I'm doing it, has it improved by bringing in the AI?
Yeah. And what's the most underrated data source that is currently sitting inside, the financial system from an AI perspective?
Wow. So data is data, I think. Data is data. So no, I don't have an answer.
You don't have an answer.
to that.
No, that's okay. I mean, that's a difficult question.
It's very difficult. And something that I might feel is underrated, might be the most important because AI per se itself is able to pick up the data points even without us telling them. So
and I think that's the point you made earlier. They kind of like there's no bias, and when someone doesn't have any bias, then they see things in a clearer way.
So we see a lot of rides taking on Little by ladies between 6 in the evening all the way up to 10. The number of ladies taking rides on Little goes up. We knew something, why that would be, but we picked up all that data and threw it to, an AI model and says, can you help us to analyze this? And it said many things, but one thing that it says possible reason why ladies are taking Little is because they feel it's safer. Ladies accept their rights to be safer than to be not safer. Among like 10 different things, that was the first one. So when AI picked it up, that I says, look, AI is smart. He's smart, yeah.
Had you guys thought of that?
No, we had thought of it and we knew that was the reason. But we knew it because we know ladies, we know Kenya, we know how nonsense is happening on other apps. So we knew it. But when AI picks that up, I mean, we were surprised to death.
And did it kind of offer like any now next steps, like you should actually now focus on this as a key?
So then we said, okay, what we should do, can you help us to create campaigns around that? Can you help us to do that? And obviously then that became, it all came in. But my point to make over there is that if to detect that particular behavior of a lady feeling safer on Little, and that may be the reason they are taking more rides between this, because these hours are riskier hours or odd hours. in my view, that was just super amazing.
Yeah. No, thank you so much for taking the time. I think this has been an excellent discussion. Always a pleasure. I really, as I said earlier, I really value your technological insights, because you've got a way to kind of merge the deep technological insights with practical commercial applications and how actually human beings do things. I think one of the big things I've taken out, of course, is the voice thing. I'll be looking at that and seeing touch base with you a few years from now and check on that. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It was my pleasure.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks.